Thank you all for coming tonight. My name is Andrew McGregor. I am the Vice President this year of the Los Angeles Adventurers Club, a storied institution that for the past 100-some-odd years has brought adventurers, explorers, and such ilk from all around the world to share knowledge and encourage others to do the same. And I have the wonderful privilege of sitting across from Dave Torstenson tonight, who's going to tell us all about his extensive time, experience, and devotion to the place of Kurdistan, and Iraqi Kurdistan specifically. Thank you, Dave. It's a humble joy and privilege to know you, and then to be able to help share your story with this audience and then the world.
Thank you.
Before we go into give a bit of context, what is a Kurdistan?
Right. Yeah, it's a good question to ask. I think, in general, I think folks have now heard of Kurdistan in general, but there are a couple of different ways to define it. So what we're looking at right now, I found this, it's a geographic relief map of the country of Iraq. And so when you think of Kurdistan, you look at that crescent there kind of in the top of the country, the really mountainous region. That is more or less what's considered Iraqi Kurdistan. And if we look at the next map here, you can kind of start to see how this breaks out province by province. Now this is a map of Iraq. I believe it's post 2005, so this is all fairly recent. So Iraqi Kurdistan comprises the 3 provinces there in that same general area. So you've got 3 provinces in Iraq: Duhok, Erbil, and Sulaymaniyah. And then to go to the next map to kind of show how it breaks down ethnically in Iraq, the Kurds make up about 20% of the population of Iraq. And so I think a lot of folks are kind of familiar with the fact that there are really 3 major factions in Iraq. You've got the Sunni Arab, you've got the Shiite Arab, and then you've got the Kurd populations. And so those 3 are kind of the main groups. There's a couple of other smaller minority groups as well, but that really is the groupings there. And so again, Iraqi Kurdistan is kind of comprised of that section of the country. I think it's about, I believe it's about 5 million Kurds that live in Iraq. But then, and we can go to the next map here and see we can kind of see what the broader region, and actually this is the one to show the ethnic breakout within the country of Iraq. If we go to the next map, we actually see that the greater Kurdistan, or the broader Kurdistan, actually spreads out across 4 different countries. So we see on the next map here, it's Iraq, Iran, Turkey, and Syria. And so kind of spreads out beyond any real specific national borders. And so you might say that, a lot of folks would say that the Kurds are presently the largest ethnic group without their own specific sovereign state.
And then, how does that play out to be a people without a country? Like, was it ever a country, and then like World War I destroyed it, or is there a desire to go back, or is it a ethnic notion to have a country in the future? Things like that.
Yeah. And I'm not an expert per se, and not a historian, so all of this is kind of just from what I've gleaned over the years of working there. But the Kurds, there's a saying in Kurdistan, in Kurdish, that they say that the Kurds have no friends but the mountains. So it's kind of a colloquialism there. They have been for years, certainly in the 20th century, have kind of lived at odds with their neighbors. So you've got your Arab populations to the south. There have been a lot of contentions there. Turkey to the north. There's a lot of antagonism there. So I think if I remember my history, I believe in World War I, after the fall of the Ottoman Empire, I believe it was the British. Wasn't what is the British mandate? But there was the Sykes-Picot line, or basically the ruling that they made post World War I. They just basically partitioned Iraq without any real concern, to be honest, about where those divisions might be bringing together different ethnic groups or separating. And so in the case of Iraq, that's kind of where we see this kind kind of forcing together of 3 different groups of peoples who might prefer to be have their own independent states. So all that to say, Kurdistan for pretty much the entirety of the 20th century and then coming into the 21st century, independence has certainly been a forefront in their aspirations. They've really wanted to be, fully not just autonomous, but fully sovereign state. And we've seen certainly in the last 30 years from the Gulf War in 1991 and on, Kurdistan started receiving more and more of that sovereignty or that ability to govern semi-autonomously. And so I think in a lot of ways, I think that Kurdistan has gotten a taste of it and certainly would like to have more of that sense of sovereignty or freedom. They had the last, I believe, that I'm aware, there was a referendum in 2017, I think. So not too long ago. And I think the vote was like 97% of the Kurdish population voted for independence. And the Iraqi government, based in Baghdad, said, we're not gonna split the pie right now. So you're kind of stuck with us. And I think they actually sent troops and took back some of the land as a result. So it's kind of fraught. The desire to be autonomous certainly comes with a lot of that challenge as well.
Would you say it's analogous to like the Scots and the Welsh in the UK? Is it kind of like we have this ethnic with its own language and culture thing under the hegemony of like a conventional colonial power? Is that a rough analogy to this?
No, I think you're right. I think I think that would make sense. And certainly since 1991, the Kurds, there's Kurdish language, so there's several different dialects. So Kurds in Iraq speak mostly Sorani, Kurmanji. I believe that those are the 2 main dialects in Iraqi Kurdistan. So they have their own language. It's literally called the Kurdistan Regional Government. So for all intents and purposes, it is a government within the broader government. And at times that has even resulted in Kurdish politicians coming into power in the broader Iraqi state. So the first president of Iraq after the fall of the Saddam regime in 2003 was actually a Kurd, Jalal Talabani. So he was voted in partly because you had 20% of the vote was Kurdish and they were pushing for their guy. So I think, that's actually a really good analogy to make sense of it is own language, own customs, own traditions, very distinct in a lot of ways from the rest of the country.
Cool. So you went to the University of Southern California, right?
I did, yeah.
And you had some amazing award, like Mr. USC, was that? Did that happen?
Yeah. It did happen. My memory's a little foggy. No, so I went to USC, studied broadcast journalism, and basically entered the USC equivalent of a homecoming program, homecoming court. But at USC, they're worried less about your looks or your popularity, and it's really more about what you can do for the university. And I was way over involved and just doing a lot of different extracurriculars.
Right. So how did USC's homecoming king get involved with the world's largest people without a nation? How does that transition happen?
It's an interesting story. It goes in a couple of zigzags. But I graduate from USC, degree in broadcast journalism, and so I make the most obvious choice in 2003 and moved to New York City to go play music at a church. And so my parents were thrilled with that, having just put me through 4 years of USC tuition. But go to New York. I'm a musician. I'm playing in New York, volunteering at a church. This is 2003, so we're right in the thick of, the invasion had just happened 6 months prior. As I think everyone, maybe remembers, the actual fighting portion of the war, the actual, the U.S. invasion was relatively short, and obviously it was about a 2-month war in that sense, in the more conventional sense, and then of course it starts to draw on as it becomes more of a civil war and a sectarian war. So end of 2003, I'm reading a magazine just randomly, and I look in the back, and I see this this advertisement, and it just says, "Come rebuild Iraq, one child at a time. Teach at a K through 8 at the time school in," and I love this. I still remember it said relatively stable northern Iraq, and my first thought when I read that advertisement was, man, someone would have to be a real idiot to go and do that right now. So fast forward to the very next day, and I am on their website checking it out, and just something about that. There was something about that I had just moved to New York and was still very much interested in living in New York and being there for a while, but there was something about that I don't know, it spoke to me. There was a feeling of, I wasn't in the military, didn't necessarily have intentions to go into the military, but also was kind of aware of this, this world kind of outside of the U.S. And just as I read more about the Kurds themselves and getting kind of a sense of their region and their struggle that they had been through, it sounded like a very compelling opportunity. So it wasn't for about another 2 years. It wasn't until 2005 that I actually decided to kind of sign up and go over. So yeah, so in October of 2005, that was actually when I first started going to Kurdistan.
Right, and then what was your baptism, if you will? What was that like?
Yeah. So the first week in Kurdistan is definitely one of the most surreal moments of my life. There was an author, a reporter around that time. His name was Michael Totten. And he was also living and working in the Middle East and spent a lot of time in Kurdistan. And he wrote an article about his experience being in Kurdistan relatively around the same time that I was there. And he said something to the effect of, he would go back and forth between these feelings of, I'm totally safe here, it's super safe, to like, no, there's no way, this is really dangerous, I shouldn't be here, what am I doing here? And that tracked. I mean, that was very much my experience too. I feel like that first couple of weeks that I was there felt like it felt very schizophrenic in that, or bipolar in the terms of like going from one swing of feeling safe and secure to the other swing to being like, no, this is a disaster, this is a nightmare. If we go, we can actually go to a couple slides. I think I'll start with the airport. So we land at the airport in Erbil. Erbil is the capital of the Kurdish regional government, and Erbil it's kind of smack in the middle. So you're looking at the map right now. It's kind of north. It's kind of near the northern hat, if you will, of kind of where Kurdistan is. So then we can go forward. You'll see, like, we flew into the airport in Erbil, and it's called Erbil International Airport, but it is basically the size of maybe this room. Tiny airport, but they're having a lot of international flights come in. And around this time, because there were a lot of snipers on the ground, a lot of insurgents, Al-Qaeda in Iraq was kind of waging quite a nasty terror campaign at that point. Planes would often do the spiral technique to land, so to avoid artillery fire, would produce a bit of a spin cycle to land to avoid getting hit, which I'm very glad we didn't have to go through that. But I was hearing stories up and down, in the week leading up to that flight, and was just nervous because I did not want to go into a spin cycle in the plane. So I don't know if the photo for the airport's going to pull up, but if not, it's okay. We can go to the next moment. So we land. We're at the Erbil airport. They're processing folks basically just at a single kiosk, kind of like these podiums here at the Adventurers Club. Just one person stamping visas, and we get out, and I'm with a team of folks that are heading over there. And the schools, I should back up real quick. The schools it's a parochial school. It's a school that is administered by the Christian Church in Iraq, and so Kurdish teachers, but they also wanted to bring in American and native English speakers to also kind of help, with English speaking, because that was one of the big draws, was that your child would be taught in English, and so that was a big motivating factor. So I think there were 4 or 5 of us that were coming on this particular trip, and you can see here the airport. That's pretty much the extent of it. The international airport was basically that one building. So we get out and we meet our driver and kind of our man on the ground, so to speak. And we're all getting in the seats. And I think somebody had said, well, Dave, you're the tallest, so you should ride up front. And so he, of course, looks at me and says, oh, so you're shooter. And I said, I'm sorry, what? No, you're shooter. So I opened the door, and there's an AK-47 sitting in the front seat, waiting for me to hold. And so literally riding shotgun, which I thought was just an expression from the
ordinary riding Kalashnikov, right? Expand your horizons.
That's right. Thought we left that back in the 19th century. But if you go to the next, we see the next picture here, me holding the gun. There it is, and I am. That is someone who maybe had once shot a gun, and played a little bit of 007 on the Nintendo. So when he asks, do I know how to handle this thing? I'm like, yeah, but can you just give me a quick crash course? It's been a while. So, doing my best here. This is one of our breaks on our drive through the country, just trying to look hard, trying to look tough. I had the little, you can also date this picture. This is 2005. You can tell because I've got the little soul patch there.
Soul patch is coming back.
It is, that's true, that's right. That's right, it'll look modern in a minute. So we fly into Erbil, and we've got to actually drive across the pretty much half of the region. So you're looking at the mosque, the large mosque in Erbil. It's called Hawler in Kurdish, and that was really wide. So we're going to be on the road for about 4 to 5 hours, and so at this point, those roads are still dangerous, for lack of better words. I mean, there's still potential for people to be attacked, to be caught off guard by Al Qaeda, and so we had to, you had to have somebody riding shotgun, and so we spent the day in Erbil, and so you see this is the main mosque in the city, and then we'll move forward here, and we'll see the Erbil has one of the world's oldest, and Charlie, my friend Charlie, can probably vouch for this. One of the most continuously inhabited cities is Erbil in Iraq, and they've got the citadel that sits at the center of the city, and it's kind of the old walls, and it's kind of the ancient. Structure that goes back to
like 5,000, 10,000 years.
I believe 5,000. Yeah, I believe it's 5,000 BC, or probably 3 to 5,000 BC. So what you're seeing here in this image is the bazaar, the market in Hawler, and you're driving this kind of muddy road, this dirt road, and you're seeing up ahead this what they call the citadel, and that's where kind of the ancient city was. So getting a lot of this experience. If we go to the next slide. We spent some time up there. We went into the mosque, or at least into the outside of the mosque itself. We went up to the citadel, looked around, got a great view of the city. And this is 2005. So Erbil is now beginning to just get built up. I mean, construction work, development work is starting to take place. So you're starting to see construction kind of everywhere you look.
What was the genesis of that economic renewal, if that's the right word?
Yeah, no, it is. So after, so I think the Kurds would, and I think they would say, they were definitely the biggest winners of the Iraq War, the 2003 Iraq War. So they come out, to back up, 1991, after the first Persian Gulf War, the United Nations institutes no-fly zones because Saddam had been committing genocide against the Kurds and the Arabs to the south of Baghdad. So the UN institutes no-fly zones for Saddam's armies above, I think it's like the 36th parallel, and so that comprises most of Kurdistan. So that kind of starts the economic gears just a little bit. I mean, but it's a lot of time to get infrastructure up and running. it takes the Kurds all that time to really kind of figure out the politics internally. You've got these two parties, these two political parties that are kind of at each other's throats. So by about 2003, that's what, 22 years or so? No, it's not that long, 12 years. That's given them enough runway to basically have kind of set the stage. Saddam is removed from power, the Baathists are removed from power, so now they don't have the kind of the menace of the regime that they're always kind of fending off and dealing with sanctions and things like that from. 2005, the referendum happens, and Kurdistan does become officially recognized as the regional government, as a semi-autonomous state. And at that point, a lot of the Kurds that had fled to Europe and the States begin to, at this point, it does seem like it's a good time to come back. It's a good time to come back home and reinvest in the homeland. And so you see this kind of major return of Kurds from Europe and from the States moving back in, and certainly having made wealth or produced wealth in the States and in Europe, come back and are investing in the country. And so so you see this incredible time of development from 2005 even to the present day. Kurds coming back and just pouring back into the economy. Certainly the fact that there's oil certainly is very helpful too. Kurdistan has significant oil reserves. I think it's something on the line of like 750 billion barrels, I think, of oil reserves. So that also certainly now that they're freed up to actually sell directly, that has also given their economy a major boost as well. So I think that was kind of what drove a lot of that development, certainly starting in 2005. So I don't know if we can go. So what happens in Erbil then? So you have it's such an interesting contrast. You've got the old citadel, this old 5,000, even 7,000-year-old city, and then you've got in front of it, you've kind of got the bazaar here, and so you can kind of see one of the tapestry dealers here. And then if we keep going on to some of these pictures, you'll see, we scaled, we took the road up to the top of the citadel, and you can kind of look out over the city. You get a kind of a view of the whole region itself from there. So really quite impressive, really quite beautiful. Certainly not like anything I'd experienced up to that point. And so that's the first day alone. And we can kind of I can kind of share moving into like the actual teaching itself, or if there's.
So you mentioned it was a Christian organization. Was there a conflict there, or are all things tolerated under Kurdishness kind of thing, or were there these kind of sub-animosities?
Yeah.
And then you're a foreigner as well, so did like Kurdish hospitality erase it?
This
kind of speak to that, yeah.
Yeah. I don't want to make a Chekhov joke, but you've definitely set up the third act of this story. This, by the way, the picture you're seeing here is of the citadel and one of the statues up there. But no, you definitely yes, and to put it, basically the fact that it was the Iraqi church, and that was a church comprised of both Arabs coming from Baghdad who were professing believers and felt like they needed to relocate to Kurdistan to practice more or to have more religious freedom. There was that piece of it. So there's that element of it too. I think certainly folks that were sending their kids to school were not really particularly religious, I would say. Large majority of our kids weren't, necessarily students that came from a Christian background. And by the way, in Iraq, in the Middle East, there's also, you've got there's a couple of different ethnic minorities, the Chaldeans, the Assyrians, that are, Arab Christians, basically. So you've got those populations, but at least in our city, they weren't really the students that we were working with. Our students were I'd say they were nominally Muslim. Kurds are Sunni Muslim, but Kurds are also a little bit more, I'd say, moderate in general. They're a little more moderate in their practices. And so I think that the prevailing notion was, your kids are going to go to this school. It's going to be a great education. It's going to be a Western education. They're going to be taught English. And I think for a lot of the families that were coming back from Europe and the States, that was the draw. And so they weren't, it wasn't necessarily, it was, it was a religious school, but I think parents in general were quite all right with that because it's also a great education, and so they were happy to send their kids and reap the benefit of that.
Would you say that's kind of analogous to like a lot of Catholic schools in America, which provide like a decent education, even though people aren't necessarily Catholic, they'll send their kids. So that's
I think
that's an okay.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it.
Okay.
Yeah. And again, it's like at the end of the day, the students, the parents that were sending their kids there wanted good education. They wanted their kids to learn English. In theory, they wanted their kids to continue on to school, to go to college in Europe and the States for the most part. And so I think those were the main draws. And one quick point to note here. So by the way, you're looking at a photo here of some of the kids. So we had schools in several of the cities throughout Kurdistan. So before we left Erbil on that first day, I visited the school in Erbil, in Hawler, and so these were some of the kids that we saw there. Just to kind of define it a little bit more, I like to think of that there's like the three main cities in Kurdistan. You've got Sulaymaniyah, which is pretty close to Iran. It's about 30 miles from Iran. You've got Hawler, which is kind of right in the middle. And then you've got Duhok, which is on the western side, probably about 10 to 15 miles from the Turkish border. And just to kind of put it in context for us, I think it's an interesting way to compare it for California. I would say Sulaymaniyah is kind of analogous to San Francisco. Erbil or Hawler is kind of like LA, I'd say. It's big, it's sprawling. It's kind of the seat of power, at least in Kurdistan. And then Duhok is kind of like San Diego. And it's beautiful. Duhok is beautiful, but also a little bit more conservative. So a lot more conservative Muslims that lived in Duhok. Erbil was a little bit more cosmopolitan, but it was still it was a little bit of both. And then Suli was kind of like San Francisco. It was very progressive. It was definitely kind of makes that. I think that's a pretty apt description to kind of to give that metaphor.
Cool.
Yeah.
Right. So, what was your life like? Did the kind of schizophrenia of safety and well-being affect you, or was it like kind of you used to call it like going native, but was it that leaving of your own culture and like joining this other culture? Was that the friction, or could you talk about that experience?
Yeah. I mean, it's coming in and having signed up for about 8 months to live there for 8 months. You're kind of looking at it like it's kind of sink or swim, really. You've got to really learn how to make your life work in this context. And in a situation that feels so foreign at this point, I think the interesting thing is that in 2005 and then going into 2006, this still felt like it was 12,000 miles away or whatever it is. It still felt like you were halfway around the world. There were little signs of westernization or modernization, perhaps. But it still, in a lot of ways, really felt like it was a completely foreign experience, and so we'll go into some of the photos next here about my week in like being in Sulaymaniyah, the first week in Sulaymaniyah, first week at the school. But I think in general, the biggest challenge off the bat is it's the winter and it gets cold up there because it's in the mountains and it actually snows. So I think I've got a picture here. We'll pull it up of the snowy hills right around the city. So there's that to contend with, but we also don't have a functioning electrical grid. And so what they would do, the officials would, they would basically store up power and basically ration it out. So you were only really getting about 2 to 3 hours of what we called city power a day during the winter. And so what you did is you had to kind of supplement that with a lot of kerosene heaters in the house. Basically, almost every household had a gas-powered generator, and so you could also kind of generate your own power for an additional 6 to 8 hours. But even with that, you do the math on that, so you're really still looking at about 13 hours of the day that you're going without power. And so that was a big challenge to start off with. I'm in this new country, in this new city. I've got to just wear my gloves when I'm in my house. We lived in a very big, very marble-laden house. It was very cavernous. And so, yeah, marble floors, not much in the way of insulation. So it was freezing in there. And so I was pretty much always just bundled up from pretty much all the way through till I'd say like February, March. So you've got that, the power is a big piece to deal with there. The language, obviously, people speak English, but it's not at this point is not fluently spoken. And I had only started learning Kurdish as I started kind of preparing to go. There's not a lot of resources to learn Kurdish. It's not like Spanish or even Arabic. It's a pretty small footprint in terms of linguistics. So I think communication was a problem in a lot of ways. And so just learning that, I thought that was one of the great things to kind of go back to what you were saying, to kind of go native. I really relished learning how to be able to communicate and how to learn Kurdish and to pick it up quickly enough that I could have a conversation at the convenience store. Just be able to ask for the basics, and then the basics turn into someone asks a question and you don't know, and you nod and smile politely and just say, I don't know, I don't understand. And over time, that would eventually, you'd start to kind of build up a vocabulary in that sense. This is an interesting thing, by the way. We're looking at this photo here on the slide. This was one of the billboards that the country, that the federal state of Iraq would put up as part of the kind of, hey, we have national elections. It's all about forging a new Iraq. And so, kind of interesting that they were advertising that and kind of really making this big push in the cities. But anyway, to go back to your question, though, I think the power was a big piece. The language barriers, obviously, and then certainly as you see now in the classroom, I was not a teacher by trade, so I had to kind of learn, kind of trial by fire, baptism by fire, so to speak. So I had to kind of learn very quickly, not only how to be a teacher and how to be a decent teacher at least, but also in a different context. And so classes, certainly in the Middle East and in Kurdistan in particular, very different from what we grew up with. A lot of the native teachers would just kind of yell at the students, and that was kind of the expectation. That was kind of how you would communicate, was whoever was the loudest person in the room got the microphone. And so I come in and I'm not really familiar with this. I'm trying to do the polite, okay, everyone, can we keep it down? Quiet coyote, trying to do all of the things that I think might be effective. And it takes a while. And I think part of it, what I had going for me was I am a foreigner, and these kids are like at least willing to give me a welcome and be a little bit nicer to me. So I think they were nicer to me, and I think they weren't as hard on me as they were with the other teachers. You're seeing some of the other teachers, the Kurdish teachers that I worked with here. So these are three of the guys that I worked closely with that year. But I think those are three main areas that I can just think of off the top of my head that were really difficult. I think another piece was just how to function. We had our guy who, my Kurdish guy, who would go out and pick stuff up at the marketplace, or would go work with the city government or whatever. He would help us kind of get the things done that absolutely needed to get done, or he'd buy things for us. But after a while, you got to kind of learn how to do that on your own as well. And so you start to learn how to navigate the city, how to navigate, in this case, like this photo. This is a gas station. This is literally, you just pull up to the side of the road and they've got a bucket of petrol that they'll funnel into your car, and you have to learn how to kind of negotiate how much and what you pay and this and that. So I think those are all kind of, and this is the house that I was mentioning. So huge, way too big, and it was me and one other teacher shared that house. Another American, his name was Jeremiah. And so we shared this massive house, way too big for just two single dudes. But actually, it was also kind of nice to have a lot of space to work with.
Yeah, it's a palace of sorts.
That's right, it was. Yeah.
A cold marble palace.
yeah. Up in the mountains of Kurdistan.
Okay. So then, all right, you're in there, you're in the world. How did Kurdishness kind of affect your psyche? Like when you look back, like pre-post Kurdistan Dave, what was added or taken from you on kind of a soul level, if you will?
That's a really interesting question. I think, well, first of all, my experience, like the Kurds were just incredibly gracious, and I think just so hospitable and so warm. And I think that was, and this was kind of my first true venture into like a long term outside of the U.S. I'd spent a few weeks in college in Japan, but nothing like this. So I think really learning how to I think just to be open to like other cultures and really to kind of be a little bit more open-minded, I suppose, to understand that things that I expect that happen a certain way, when you kind of take a step back and you look at it, what you realize is, well, it happens that way in your Western American, Californian, or New York context. I'll give you an example. And folks that have been in the Middle East are probably familiar with this idea, but like our American or Western idea of punctuality is very different. It's very different in that Kurdish folks, and I think Middle Eastern in general, not to overgeneralize, but I think in general, punctuality is not as important as the relationship. And so if I'm spending time with you, but I have another friend that I need to go see, in America, we'd say, hey, this has been really great, Andrew, it's been fun catching up, but I got a 3 o'clock meeting across town. I gotta hop out of here. That doesn't really work that way in Kurdistan. If I have said 3 o'clock, it's very likely that's not going to be until 5 o'clock. And I think at first that kind of annoyed me a little bit, just because, again, kind of used to this way of living. But I think I certainly kind of came away with an appreciation for like the reasons why, the underlying reasons why. I still prefer the Western way, and certainly the way that I was raised, but can certainly understand. It's a different mindset. It's way more relational. It's way more about the good of the group and what's good for the community. I think when we talk a little bit about, certain cultures have kind of our elements of shame attached or elements of guilt. I think there is certainly a degree of, in Kurdistan, you do kind of experience this feeling of like you don't want to bring shame to your family or shame to yourself. And so in a lot of ways, I think that actually does, in some senses, drives a lot of the generosity or the willingness to literally take the shirt off someone's back and give it to you, because they don't want to bring shame to their family or a dishonor to their family. And I think that's interesting. And again, I may not necessarily feel comfortable in that context totally, but coming away, it is an interesting thing to take away and to kind of see that it's just a different. There's two different. There's this way of living. There's this way of living, and neither of them are necessarily wrong. It's just we have different paths in how we relate to one another. With the Kurds, one of the things I loved about Kurdistan was going over to people's houses for a meal, and a meal would usually be about a 4 to 6 hour affair. So if you're there for lunch, you're basically there for all the way through dinner, and if you're there for dinner, you're staying for half the night. And there's a certain there's almost a certain pageantry to it, So you would go, get the big spread, usually sit on the floor, spread out a big picnic blanket, and you just all sit and just eat food on the floor. And then you'd keep having dishes brought out, and you just keep eating, and you'd keep eating, and you keep eating. You'd stop for a while, you'd drink some tea, and then some more food would come out, and you'd eat some more, and obviously, in my case, I'm trying to kind of pace myself, because I'm like, gosh, I want to be a good guest and not refuse the food, but I'm stuffed at this point usually. But then there's an interesting kind of routine in which then dessert is served, usually like a baklava or something like that. And then more tea, and then usually fruit. Fruit is usually fruit and like walnuts are usually the last thing that's served, and that's usually kind of the signal. That's kind of the like, hey, cool. So you've got about 15 minutes until you should just politely say, I've got to go, and your host will say, no, please stay, please stay. No, I'm so sorry, I have to go. And there's this idea in, at least as I understand it in Kurdish culture, you have to kind of refuse 3 times. I have to go. No, please stay. No, I really have to go. No, please stay. No, I have to go. All right, if you have to go. So that took a lot of getting used to. And as again, as a Westerner, as an American, that was hard for me. It was hard for me to like, if I were to say, if I would say, no, please, they'd say, I insist. And sometimes I would take that at face value. Oh, you insist? Well, okay, you insisted. And so I had one student years after all of this, when I came back on one of my subsequent trips, he would take me to this falafel shop in the bazaar, and he would take me, I think, every day. And after about a week of him like insisting on paying, what I started realizing was like, no, I'm being kind of a jerk here, not intentionally, but I'm letting this kid pay because I'd be like, no, let me get this. No, come on, can you let me get this? No. Well, okay, if you insist, I guess, And I didn't have the tenacity or the persistence to.
For the third insistence.
The third one, I'd get 2.
Stopped at 2.
Yeah, I stop at 2. So there were a few times where I'd realize I'd kind of, hit some faux pas there culturally, where this poor kid paying for his teacher, who's twice his age, paying for his meal for like a week straight because the teacher just didn't have the wherewithal to understand, like, no, seriously, like, keep refusing and insist that you pay. So, yeah, I don't know how much of that, to answer your initial question, I mean, I don't know how much that necessarily changed the chemistry of how I see the world, but certainly I think refined and kind of helped me kind of really understand just that there are so many different ways to approach the world. So
when you did your own wedding proposal, was that like a 3-time thing? And she's like, oh, sure, fine.
Yeah. Thankfully, my wife accepted on the first try. So
yeah.
it was,
no more awkwardness.
Yeah. No, please. No, I can't get married to you. No, please, you'll be great. Yeah. So it is like that piece was really hard for me, and certainly bartering in the bazaar as well. Similar situation. I don't know, for folks that have experienced living in the Middle East or visiting the Middle East, probably can relate. It's hard, at least in my sense. I'm very much used to, how much is this? Okay, that I accept your price. I will give you this money, and that's the end of this transaction. In the Middle East and certainly in Kurdistan, you have to barter. And part of that, what I've realized, it took me years to realize it, but again, it's coming back to that idea of a transaction can be very cold if it's just, here's what this costs. Okay, I accept. Good day to you. It's kind of sterile. It's a little cold. It's a little emotionless. And what there is this kind of idea of you're building kind of a connection with this person. So the barter, even though it feels very awkward and weird to say, no, are you crazy? $10, I want it for 7, or I want it for 5. No, 8. You go back and forth. But what it is there is you are having a conversation. You are having a connection. You are kind of building this relationship, really, which I thought was interesting. This photo that you're seeing here, this is a couple years in. This is actually the student I was referring to that very generously would always pay for my falafel because I was a jerk and didn't know better. But this is us in the bazaar, and this is one of the DVD shops in the bazaar. So one of my favorite things of being in Kurdistan was all of the American movies that I was missing out on while I was away. I would just have to go to one of these DVD shops, and they have pirated thousands of movies. And because you can't buy them, you can't buy the actual, whatever movie that just came out, because there is no distribution of those DVDs or at the time VHS in Kurdistan. So these guys would pirate them off the internet, burn a DVD, and sell it to you for $1. So that was kind of one of the fun things here. This is another interesting shot that I took. This is 2007, so we went forward a little bit here, but this is an internet cafe where you have the little booths there, and I just love looking up at the upper left-hand corner, just getting a little nervous about those wires, and that was very common. I think to you're asking earlier about things that would make me nervous. Got very nervous about the sketchy wiring in certain buildings and certain houses. Actually had the split unit, the split air conditioning unit in one of my classrooms. I was in the middle of giving a test. This is 2010. I'm giving a test. It's like a 5th grade history class, and I'm giving kind of like the final midterm exam, and that split unit starts sparking and starts catching on fire, and so the wires catch on fire, and so all my students race out of the room, and I can't remember if we put out the fire. I mean, it went out pretty quickly, thankfully, but certainly disrupted my my schedule for the day.
It's almost like a answered prayer to the lazy student, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. That's right. That was it. Yeah, prayed for just the right thing that day. Yeah. So I mean, certainly culture shock was real. And I think there was no getting around that. I think in general, I would say it probably took me about 4 months of living in Kurdistan before I really kind of got into the rhythm of it, and the things that felt very foreign and weird weren't really feeling that weird or foreign anymore. I could make my way around the city pretty well. I could communicate fairly well, and we were starting at that point. The weather was gorgeous. It was beautiful. It was before the summer hit and got really hot, so we had a lot of time where we got to go out and spend time outdoors. Kurdish culture is really big on picnics, really big on enjoying this beautiful, beautiful countryside. Actually, if we go back to the photos, I think it should say Kurdish New Year. We can go back and maybe talk a little bit about Kurdish New Year, because I think that was for me kind of one of the real turning points for where I kind of really got to kind of feel like I was, again, going native or going local a little bit. So Kurdish New Year is, it's called Nowruz, and it's essentially Persian New Year. So it's March 21st, so the first day of spring. And it's, Persian New Year. It's the Kurdish New Year. I think it has its roots in Zoroastrian religious celebrations. But the Kurdish people for New Year will just get decked out to the nines, wearing these beautiful, beautiful traditional Kurdish clothes called jili Kurdis. The women tend to wear like these beautiful, bright sequin dresses. The men wear the kind of traditional jili Kurdi, which I described as MC Hammer pants. So you got the kind of the parachute pants, and then you've got a big sash that goes around your waist, and you have a big kind of suit jacket that tucks into it. And we'll see a picture here in a minute of kind of what that looks like. So that's March 21st. So this is kind of at the halfway point for me, maybe a little later than half. And what happens is you basically spend a week straight just dancing. You're doing kind of what I call the Kurdish two-step is what I called it. But it's called halparki. It's you basically do a kind of a Kurdish dance. We've actually got a video of it. If we go back probably about 20 pictures or so, I should say Kurdish New Year, I think, or Kurdish dancing with teachers. And what you do is you just line up and you hold hands and you just kind of do this kind of like a half hokey pokey. So you put your right foot in, you put your right foot out, you put your right foot back in, you put your right foot back out, and you just do that for like hours on end. And it sounds really boring, and maybe for other folks that might not be that terribly enjoyable, but I loved it. This was me in my element. So this is where you can see here, if we'll find the video, I really start to kind of ham it up and just had so much fun, really, just dancing this traditional Kurdish dance with them. Everybody's dressed up, we're dancing, and then everybody goes out into the countryside, and you're going out and you're having these massive picnics out in the most gorgeous countryside that you could think of. Beautiful mountains. There's a really beautiful lake in Kurdistan called Lake Dukan. There we go. Yeah, here's a picture.
Oh, baby.
Yeah. So you can see me. So this is me. This is my roommate Jeremiah. We just lost it, but so Jeremiah and I were the two Americans that were there. and then two of our fellow teachers. We taught classes with these two ladies, and so they're wearing the Jili Kurdi. And I think if you go, I think I think the video should say like dancing, Kurdish dancing, but if we could pull that up, maybe we'll watch a little, slightly embarrassing, but.
Is it like a hypnotic trance thing, or is it just
so.
like joy to the world? Yeah, what's the experience of dancing half a hokey pokey for 2 hours?
Yeah.
And learning that Kurdistan is really what it's all about.
I think you're right. I think hypnotic trance is a good way to put it. It's, because there is certainly like you're dancing, but what's happening is everyone's kind of taking turns leading the line. And so what happens is that somebody will get into the front of the line and wave, wave a sash or wave a head covering or a scarf or something, and they're kind of leading the procession, and then somebody comes up and then takes over for them. And so it's a little bit of just kind of everyone just kind of getting their turn to jump in. I love Kurdish music. I loved. I was very fond of some of the stuff that we were listening to around that time. But just a very joyous, the experience is quite joyous. It's very energetic. And it's very Middle Eastern too. If you hear the music, you hear ululating, like people are doing, kind of making I can't even do the sound, but they're doing the sounds. And it's so much fun. It's like this just big party, and just had a blast. I don't know if we're able to pull that video up.
It'll come.
It'll come. Yeah.
Inshallah.
Inshallah. That's right. Yeah, inshallah. That's right. Another piece of Kurdish and Middle Eastern culture that you have to get used to is inshallah. So.
Cool. So
if it doesn't happen today, will it happen tomorrow?
Well, we can.
Inshallah.
Inshallah, we'll fix it in post.
That's right. That's right.
So all right. So you finish your 8-month contract, and then but you keep coming back, and like, how does just give us like the kind of the broader narratives then, like you're in the world and
Yeah. So I go back. So
and also how is the war and the insurrection kind of like affecting the students and things like that?
Let me start with that first. I think that's a good segue for sure. So again, I'm painting this picture of it's Nowruz. It is a big party. We're going on picnics. We're dressing up. We're going down. Here we go. Here's there's another picture. This is some of the students, by the way. They're wearing the Kurdish head coverings or the hats. This is another picture of us in the line. Teachers, students, and everyone's just getting together and dancing. So it does. But to put this in context, this is spring of 2006, and so 300 miles to the south is like there is a civil war that is raging on right now. It is just Baghdad is just getting like daily multiple bombings and attacks and just the most devastating news coming out of the south of the country. And I'm getting emails from friends, concerned friends and family back home, back in the States, saying, oh my God, are you okay? What's going on? And my response is, we're good. We went roller skating today. we did a Kurdish dance today. It was there was such a disconnect from what was happening in the rest of the country. So as the rest of the country is deteriorating and devolving into sectarian nightmare of civil war and violence and Al-Qaeda in Iraq grabbing a kind of a foothold in the western part of the country, we're in this region and we're very much isolated from it. And I think that's an interesting point to make. I say 300 miles. So think of it as like the difference of like being in LA and something horrible happens in San Francisco. You can imagine, if somebody were to say, "Oh, wow, what? Oh, are you okay? Are you okay?" Our response would be, like, "No, we're fine. We're fine. That's Northern California. Horrible to hear about it, but it's not affecting us right now." And it was interesting because I did notice, certainly, like I think in the American press. There's an old journalism. If it bleeds, it leads. There's an old journalism saying, the bad news obviously is going to make the front page. But I thought it was interesting living there and kind of seeing how much of that bad news kind of painted a picture that the entire country was like an absolute nightmare at that moment. And in reality for us, It really wasn't that. And yet, there was still, at every turn, at every step of the way, as much fun as this was, I keep going back to that quote from Michael Totten. It's like, am I safe? It's really safe, right? It's 100% safe. Oh no, you shouldn't be here. What are you doing here? You'd get, everywhere you'd go, you'd have to go through a checkpoint. You'd get a bomb check. You'd get somebody with a mirror looking under the chassis of your car to check and see if somebody had planted a car bomb. Your firearms, if you carried, had to be placed at a little kiosk before you'd enter a restaurant or a bowling alley or a skating rink or anything like that. Here we go. Here's the video. You'll excuse the goofy American there in the middle, but. And so now she's going to take over. She's like, you're done. It's my turn to wave the scarf. Or I guess she got second place there. So yeah, for some people, maybe the idea of doing this for like hours on end would sound awful. It sounds kind of crazy. I really enjoyed it. Maybe not for hours on end. I think after two hours, I was like, I'm good. But definitely really relished. It was just so much fun because it's just a big party. And again, contrasting what you imagine in 2006 as the rest of the country is just experiencing so much violence. This is the mood up here. So it was really quite a weird like juxtaposition. Like you really weren't sure what to entirely believe. But to go back to your other question then, about kind of the broader term. So this is 2006. And so I go through and I finish out the school year here. So it's summer of 2006. And my plan was actually to come back and teach another full year. But to be honest, I got back to the States and, for a variety of reasons, it just didn't really, I got back to America and it felt nice. I mean, that's kind of the reality of it. It was nice to be back home. I moved back to New York for a while, and then eventually moved to LA about 6 months later. And then life, as it happens, it happened here and started, working on a documentary film, and started just kind of building a life here. And so that plan of coming back for a full school year, I think was always kind of in the, that was kind of the initial idea, but I think just coming back, it felt really nice to kind of be back in kind of a more of a familiar, more native culture. But what happened was, and I think what was kind of a nice, for me at least, a nice middle ground was that I was able then to kind of go back in kind of more of a short-term capacity every year from that point on through till 2012. And what that looked like was coming back, helping bring new teachers, kind of help bring them into Kurdistan, be there to do little seminars. At this time in the States, as I've come back to LA, I've started teaching SAT classes. And so now I have opportunities to come back and be able to teach some of these kids who are preparing to study and want to take the SAT to potentially go to college in America. I'm able to come back here and teach, kind of one-off 2-week courses like that. So it was a nice kind of a happy medium for me that, whereas I didn't feel like it was that my life was necessarily entirely in Kurdistan. It didn't feel like necessarily the right fit for a long term. I was able to come back and yeah, for about 8 years there, 8 years in a row, was able to be there in some capacity or another.
And it was during this time that like kind of ISIS emerged and like, yeah. So,
Yeah, so Al-Qaeda in Iraq is still in, it's in the Western province while we're there. While I was there, I remember there, big news about al-Zarqawi was the head of AQI at that point, notorious leader of the group, and just very barbaric, and he was killed at some point, and so it seemed like there was like at least I believe from what I remember, that group kind of lost a lot of its sway in the region, but it started to reform and slowly kind of regroups, and by 2014 it has now reemerged on the world scene as ISIS or ISIL or Daesh. And so it's kind of picking up the remnants of what had been Al-Qaeda in Iraq. And so it has now basically spread into Syria. The group has now begun to kind of establish control and establish a caliphate in Syria, and that has also like takes up the western part of Kurdistan. And so I've got a picture. It's quite a ways forward here, if we can find it. It's with two Yazidi men. And so in 2009, on my trip back to Kurdistan in 2009, I actually taught in a different city that year, and that was more of a long-term. I was a long-term sub that year, so I was actually there for 3 months, relieving another teacher, a Brazilian teacher, and his wife, who were going to go back home, and were expecting a child. So I go back, and I live in the city of Duhok, this is a picture of Duhok here. Again, beautiful country, like just the dam and the lake there are just gorgeous, and there's some other pictures here you'll see. Just really, this one's in the also in the Duhok group. I'll tell this story first because it's a little more lighthearted, and then it gets a little sadder with the Yazidi. So I'm there in 2009, and it's around Christmas time. It's around the holiday season, and the school is putting on a Christmas program, and they're asking, again, a Christian school. It's affiliated with the Iraqi church, and so I assumed this would be, being that it's a religious school, probably going to be religious in nature. It's going to probably be more focused on Jesus and probably less on Santa. And I get a request the day before. It said, "Mr. David, we need someone to play Santa. Can you do it?" And I think my response literally was, "It's because I'm white, isn't it?" Like, I'm the one white guy here. And they said, "Well, it's because you will fit the costume that we have." And it was like a velour. It was almost like a tracksuit that was in the closet that they had. And they pulled it out and they gave it to me. This suit was a nightmare. They gave me a mask. Like there was a Santa mask that went with this. And so I with that hat. And so I ripped the mask off. I said, "I'm not wearing that. That's creepy. I don't want to terrify the children." So I put the hat on, I put the beard on, I stuffed the velour tracksuit with some pillows. I wish, by the way, I don't know what happened. I feel like I've lost a lot of photos from this era. This is the only photo I have. It's a selfie I'm taking right before I'm supposed to go on. But you don't get to see you don't get the full experience. But what happens is I go up into the front of this presentation hall, and they say they're blaring big, they're like some house music. It's a big dance party in this room, and I come up and I'm supposed to say ho 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 and Merry Christmas, and we're gonna give out gifts to all the children. And I was just getting kind of worried when I noticed that there were no gifts yet procured for the children. So kind of asking our teacher, our head teacher, they are coming, right? Like the gifts are coming, right? Because I am supposed to say that the gifts are coming, right? Yes, no, we got it taken care of. Go up on stage. Kids are mobbing me at this point. They're like, "Santa, Santa." Some of my kids in my 4th and 5th grade classes are like, "Mr. David, I know it's you." And this is all happening, and then they say, I get up on stage, they hand me a microphone, and they say, what am I supposed to do with this microphone? Give a speech. Give us a ho, ho, ho. I don't know what am I supposed to say here. So give a speech. Ho, ho, ho. Everyone's going to get a present. Merry Christmas. Give the microphone back. The music starts playing again. Start dancing for a good minute or two. Then they say, okay, Mr. David, you should say something about Jesus now. And I fire like just the death stare at this guy. I'm like, you've got me wearing this clown suit of like the worst dressed Santa. Like I'm not fooling anybody. I mean, look at those eyebrows. This is not an old man. And I am not happy about any of this. I don't want to give a speech at this point about Jesus. It felt very, very incongruous. So I take the mic away, say, okay, remember, Christmas is Jesus' birthday. So happy birthday, Jesus. Ho, ho, ho. And the dance music comes back on, and the kids are dancing, and everything's happening. And now they're saying, okay, now we're going to hand out the presents. And they give me a trash bag of like maybe 20 stuffed animals. And there are 300 kids in this room. And I know this is not going to end well. And I'm the face of this too. So I know that I'm in trouble, and so I am going back to my head teacher saying, "Are you kidding me? Like, where are the rest of these presents?" And one of the other teachers, who was not the nicest guy, but funny guy, but he's like, "Just tell them to go outside. Tell them the other presents are outside the hallway." And so I'm sitting here, and by the time I even get the trash bag, like it's too late. The kids have already like descended and ripped open the trash bag, and it's just pandemonium. And these stuffed animals are getting like handed out left and right, or like just grabbed left and right. And it's like 15 seconds, and they are gone. And now I've got kids coming up, and I've got kids that are crying, that are in tears, like, "Oh, Mr. Santa, I didn't get my present." I've got other kids that are like, "Hey, Mr. Santa, can you hook me up with one? I'll give you like 10 dinar or whatever." And it's just madness. And at this point, like, there's nothing to do because there are no more presents coming. And I'm getting like mauled at this point. I've got like the suit is getting ripped apart. Like I get out of there and I get to the back of this hall. And I'm standing in the back of the hall, not really sure what to do. And one of the little students comes up to me, and her father takes a picture of us. And then a photographer, like a guy who was a photographer in the city, sees this, is like, "Oh, this is perfect." So he goes up, and then kids start to like basically kind of form an impromptu Santa line where they can take a picture with Santa Claus, and this photographer's there, and he's handing out his business card, and so they're able to go to his photo studio the next day and buy the photo that they took with Santa. I still don't have any of these photos, which is a real shame.
You became an exploited mall Santa so quickly.
I did. That's right. I did. So this is 2009. And if we go to the next slide here, I'll kind of ease into the conversation about the Yazidi. But this is Dahuk. So this is an example of a corner market. You've got a fruit vendor here. And again, as I was kind of mentioning, Dahuk is a little bit more conservative. So Muslim women tend to wear the hijab or the headscarf more commonly than in Suli. Suli was not very common for women to wear headscarves. It was pretty much, it felt like everyone was wearing like Euro clothing, like discotheque style clothes. But this is a picture of inside the city, and then there's a lot of really incredible sites just around Dahuk. There's some of the Chaldean, there's a Chaldean monastery in a city called Al-Kosh, and then there is the Yazidi temple in a city called Lalish. And so I think these are the next ones that we'll see here in a minute here. This is the border crossing, actually. So this is a land crossing into Kurdistan from Turkey. And then if we keep going on, we'll probably see this is more of Dahuk. So big beautiful mural on the side of the hill there. So there are lots of really beautiful and really incredible sights to see. This is a view from above the city up on a hill. There's an ancient bridge a few miles up in Zaho. Like I said, there's this Chaldean monastery that's built into the side of the hillside there in Al-Kosh. This is upside down. It's upside down. There we go. There it is. That is the monastery in Al-Kosh. And then so we spent some time. My friends who were still living in Sulaymaniyah, my old roommate Jeremiah, brought some of the teachers out there. We spent a weekend here exploring some of the most incredible sites. And so then we get to Lalish. And so for those that don't know, the Yazidi are, I believe that they are kind of here it is. I want to focus on this for a moment. The Yazidi they're a Kurdish group. They're Kurdish ethnically, but they practice a kind of a more modern day version of a kind of a Zoroastrian religion. And they have this sacred temple in the city of Lalish. And I believe for Yazidi, it's required to make a pilgrimage there. I don't know if it's once a year or if it's just once in a lifetime, but similar to kind of a Hajj. This is something of a pilgrimage for the Yazidi. They go to this temple. And actually, we can go back to these two gentlemen here for just a second. So these are two of the Yazidis that I met. And so, yeah, I mean, there's no really easy way to say it. I mean, this was if you remember 2014, as ISIS begins to kind of spread and begins to kind of gain control of significant parts of Syria and Western Iraq, they come into the Yazidi village of Sinjar and massacre quite a few of the Yazidi. And so I'm not sure. These gentlemen are in Lalish, which I think Lalish was actually somewhat more of a safe haven, I believe, if I recall. So I don't know what happened. I only met these gentlemen on one day. But again, as with all the folks that I met in Kurdistan, just really lovely, wonderful people, very welcoming, very hospitable, just the sweetest gentlemen. So I was particularly I was really shaken when ISIS gained control in 2014. But the Kurds have a very well organized military called the Peshmerga. And Peshmerga is Kurdish for those who face death, and they're very well trained, well run military. And so they were actually the ones, even more than the Iraqi army. It was really the Peshmerga forces that are kind of really the heroes of pushing back on ISIS in 2014. They're the ones that really kind of held the line and pushed back the incoming ISIS forces there. You're seeing here, this is the bridge in Zaho. Zaho is a border city that borders Turkey, and this is a bridge that dates back to the Roman. I believe it's a Roman infrastructure or Roman structure. So this was Dahuk. This is 2009. This is kind of right in the thick of it. I don't know. We could go back to 2008. We could talk a bit about how we actually got to work a little bit together.
Yeah. We're somewhat short on time, so okay. We haven't hit so much of this incredible story. All right. So let me just kind of frame it this way. So you're still in Kurdistan, but you've kind of reformed yourself. Not reformed. You're now teaching journalism, and around this time. Yeah, just want kind of 10 minutes of your Chekhov third act, I guess. And
yeah.
Sorry to be emotionally.
No. I know this could go for a while, so can give it the shorter version. So yeah, so we worked together. You had founded the Tiziano Project, which was a journalism nonprofit teaching storytelling and journalism skills in conflict zones around the world. We got in touch that way. You said, hey, we'd love to be able to bring you back to Iraq and have you actually bring us into Iraq and Kurdistan as a to be able to kind of establish a program there. So that happened in 2008 in Kurdistan, and we don't have time to show it, but we had some students that were able to produce some videos. We actually were able to get them on CNN back in 2008, which was really exciting. We should stop on this slide for just a second because we're gonna talk about Jeremiah. That's 2008, 2010, I believe. I didn't come back with the Tiziana project, but we had 3 or 4 of our teammates that came back. They actually did a program in Erbil. And then in 2011 and 2012, we took up and we did a program in Israel in the West Bank. And that story could go on forever, but the short version is we moved to Jerusalem and basically had our program closed down in the West Bank. And I'm in Jerusalem. We're kind of waiting on starting up our next program with our students in East Jerusalem. And I'm on Facebook. It's the day after my birthday, so I'm looking at Facebook messages for my birthday. And I start seeing messages almost in real time as it had happened. I see Facebook messages saying, rest in peace, Mr. Jer. This was his kids would call him Mr. Jer. Rest in peace. And I'm kind of watching. This is kind of like all of a sudden just filling up my news feed on Facebook. And just kind of incidentally, just interesting how that world got really small really quickly, to go from 2005, where it felt like it was like completely isolated, to 2012, where I was on Facebook and all my students are on Facebook, and I'm watching this happen. Granted, I'm in Jerusalem, so it's not that far away, but it's all happening, and I'm seeing this all happen on my news feed. And Jeremiah unlike me, Jeremiah had decided that Kurdistan was a bit more of his long-term plan. He felt that he stayed there pretty much permanently from 2005, 2006 on, and he was teaching, I believe it's an 11th grade class, and a student stands up at the beginning of the class and shoots him from point blank range, and then takes his own life. And I had another friend that was in the room who was there as it happened, and the students, at that point, the students all fled the room. It makes, it's international news for a day. So the student, and not to get into any of the real details about it, to this day, we don't really know exactly why. He was very politically connected. His family was pretty much the most powerful family in the city. And there were a lot of suggestions as to what was it? Was it religiously motivated? Was there a power struggle? Was there, rumors have run rampant for years, and I, for one, have not ever really, there is no real good answer. But what happens in that span of a few weeks there is, I reach out to my teammates there, and I say, I'm about to go on a 2-week sabbatical from being in Israel. I'll go and spend a week with you guys. I was going to go to Morocco, but I'll go there instead. So I go there for a week and come back to Israel, and not my proudest moment, but myself and two of our other good friends that worked with the Tiziana project, we were not allowed access back into Israel. We actually got detained at the border, got questioned throughout a course of a night, and were sent back home because we had been also working with Palestinians, and long story. So I'm now kicked out of Israel, and I'm basically sent back to Istanbul, Turkey. And I'm sitting in Istanbul for about a week waiting to see if the diplomats in Washington and elsewhere can work this out and get us back into Israel. And by the time we realize at the end of the week that there's nothing they're going to do, they can't pull the strings, there's no reason to pull the strings to get these guys back to Israel, that's the point at which I realized, I think my next step is actually to go back and teach Jeremiah's classes in his stead. He was teaching 4 classes. The man was a workhorse. He taught, I think, senior English, junior level English. He taught a journalism class, several other classes I'm sure that I'm forgetting. But so it left a huge void in the school. And so I said, well, I can go back and I can go teach those classes. So I went back. Went back to Sulaymaniyah and was there for probably about 5 or 6 weeks. And then there was a television interview with the parents of the student who had taken Jeremiah's life, and accusing the school of essentially kind of being fanatical, kind of like fanatical proselytizing school, and kind of made it out to be more of a war of faith, and that kind of levied claims against Jeremiah and claims against the school, and talks of brainwashing. And I think at some point the comment was that we were worse than Al Qaeda, which was rich. So at that point, that interview takes place on a Wednesday night, and that night we get a knock on our door. We got a phone call. One of our Kurdish friends came to our house at about 11:30 at night and said, "You need to go into hiding. At this point, it is no longer safe for you to be here, because now you're a target. Now if there are extremist groups, they're now interested in making sure that the school is not continuing and operating." So we fled. We went to a safe house that night and stayed there for the course of the weekend. We got the all clear to go back on Monday, to go back to school, or Sunday. School starts on Sunday. And we got back there, and my 12th grade students, who were I had now been with them for 6 years, over the years, had got to know them, trusted them. They were smart, really compassionate, sweet kids, and they just said, "Mr. Dave, it's not safe for you guys. We don't want you. We don't think you should be here." I'm pretty sure they meant that sincerely, and it wasn't an excuse to get out of my final English exams. But they were and they said, we don't think it's safe. We think you need to go. And so we made the decision. We made the decision to pull all the Americans. I think at that point, there were 6 to 8 Americans that were working at the school. And so we made the call to bring all of us Americans back to the States. And that was it for a couple years. I mean, I think they kind of laid low for a while. I think there are now American teachers that are going back. Thankful to say, I mean, that kind of, not to end that story is kind of a heavy one to end on, but I mean, I think in the last couple of years, it has kind of come back into being a place where American teachers are welcome. I think that situation being what it was, I think it, in some senses, does feel like it was kind of a fluke or kind of a freak situation. It certainly hasn't stopped the school from continuing on. So that school, the schools are still running, and I think as a coda to like my experiences there, it's neat to see these kids that I worked with. These are some of them here. They have gone on to do some incredible things. Most of them have gone on to graduate programs. A lot of them are here in the States, gone on to programs at Harvard, Columbia, Carnegie Mellon. One of the students, I think he might be in this picture, but actually he works for a big oil company, and so he travels the world. And he actually, a couple years ago, was in LA and thought, he looked me up, and we got a beer downtown. So, and this is the classrooms. Again, very different when you think about it in terms of American, kind of what we think of as a classroom in America versus it feels like it's chaotic and all over the place, but that's kind of the experience there. And this is the last picture I took with the students on our last day before we headed back to the States. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, and I think we'll take a couple questions from the audience, but I want to just personally thank you for your kind of quiet courage, right? There's so much notion of bravado, but just the steady sacrifices and kind of ingenious kind of duty to humanity that you've always exuded and displayed is just profoundly inspiring and touching, and thank you. And again, my condolences about Jeremiah.
Thank you.
So questions from the audience? Thank you, Dave.
Yeah.
Go ahead and raise your hand if you have a question.
I'm actually really curious what your thought is. You said that the Kurds said that they have no friends except the mountains. What's the closest to any sort of political entity out there that would be like number two? That would, I mean, because I always just like one of those things you look at the map and go like, okay, well, Syria is still kind of like a decade into being imploded, and Turkey, that's kind of like that's been a long-standing issue, and so what's the closest thing the Kurds to have to like an ally or even kind of an ally or?
Yeah. Do we need to repeat that question or you picked it up on the mic?
So for all of you in the World Wide Web, the question is basically, what is Kurdistan's closest political ally, and the kind of real politics sense of the word, right? Like, is that accurate?
Yeah. So, well, honestly, the U.S. Has been seen as a major ally. I remember reading Kurds or even hearing Kurds say in 2005, 2006, we'd like to be the 51st American state. It's a weird relationship because in some sense they feel like they were betrayed after George Bush Sr. promise. There was a promise that we would kind of support them if they were to uprise against Saddam in 1991. We didn't actually do that. We kind of left them hanging in that point. So I think there's a bit of a it's a bit of a kind of a heavier situation than that, or it's not necessarily clean cut, but they do feel a real affinity for the U.S. and I think it's likewise. I did actually, in looking up the other day, interestingly enough, Israel is probably though regionally their closest ally. When the vote came to the United Nations a couple of years ago in 2017 as to whether or not they would recognize the Kurdish vote for independence, I believe Israel was one of a very few number of countries, and maybe the only one, I believe the only one in the Middle East that actually said, yes, we approve this. And in that case, even the US, this was 2017, even the US, being friendly as it is, we kind of waffled a little bit and said, well, we support you guys, but don't really want to break up the band in Iraq just yet. So I would say it's probably, Israel's probably number one, and then US is probably behind.
Okay.
Oh, Chuck's got one.
Oh, junkie, yeah.
Okay.
So you mentioned Zoroastrian. Is that the Zoroastrian is being taught there quite a bit? I mean, I know that there's I have a good friend of mine is Parsi in India. There's a Zoroastrian community in Bombay, and they have these. It's a pretty fascinating thing. They have these what they call the towers of silence, where when somebody passes on, they put them in the tower, and basically they just the birds. They just kind of disintegrate. And the birds eat them or whatever, and then air traffic is not allowed over these towers of silence. Is that a similar type thing that happens?
Yeah. So the question is basically, to extrapolate a little further, is Yazidi culture based on Zoroastrianism exhibiting the kind of conventional rituals of the towers where the dead are placed for, I think, vultures to come in, and then a restriction of air traffic out of deference to that cultural practice?
A religious garment that they wear.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as it relates to the Yazidi, yes. And I think it's a variation on Zoroastrianism. I don't remember exactly how much of that is taken from the kind of the original religion itself. But yeah, a lot of those, and to be honest, I forget most of the traditions that we learned in that day that we spent in Lalish. But yeah, very interesting rituals, a lot of, very, very much, very ritualistic, special garments. But that was really, I think Zoroastrianism, from my understanding, there are a lot of ruins, and there's a lot of, it feels in a lot of ways that it is mostly kind of in the background in Kurdistan, save for the Yazidi, who are still kind of continuing on with the traditions. But that's interesting. I didn't really know about the tower. You said the Tower of Silence. Yeah. Yeah, but it does make sense now as I think about the edifices in Lalish. Very much could see that being kind of the expectation.
So how about also the traditional music and musical instruments of the region?
Yeah, a lot of it very very much borrows from Iranian and Turkish influences. So a lot of kind of the bouzouki, kind of the big-bodied instruments there. Lots of the, I forget, I'm blanking, I'm going to call it the djembe. I know it's not it's not the right term, but the kind of the handheld drum that you can kind of hit there.
Like doumbek?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But that's really, to be honest, and this is kind of what's interesting. As a musician, I was surprised that didn't see a whole lot of non-Western instruments. Mostly whenever I'd go into a music shop, it was like I'd see Yamaha guitars and keyboards, and the music, while the music I think certainly borrows, like pop music certainly borrows from a lot of Arabic and Turkish influences. It's all kind of feels like it's very similar to that. I didn't really get a chance to experience much in the way of really many traditional performances.
In like wedding bands, or I mean, like ceremonial groups that would play for. I mean, for example, I knew that they had one time a guy had a Yamaha keyboard that was in Western tuning and Arabic tuning. I mean, the tuning is totally different than Western scales.
Yeah. The one wedding we went to, it was all piped through a big PA system. Yeah, and so it is. It is one of those interesting things where I think there's a lot of deference to a lot of the kind of the traditions and the rituals of Kurdish culture, but then what I found, and it became increasingly so as I would come back, was that they're borrowing very much from a kind of a Western mentality. One of the photos I didn't have a chance to talk about it, but we saw it a little bit. It went by in our discussion. I had some of my students performed like a hip hop performance for like a kind of a talent show or a performance or whatever, and just very interesting to me that like very much into Kurdish tradition as it relates to food, as it relates to clothing, and kind of Kurdish New Year and things like that. But in terms of music, it was very, very light. Did not notice a whole lot in the way of expressing that piece of their culture. Yeah. I mean, if and maybe when we were to go back, I mean, I'd love to dig in a little deeper. I think it'd be a really interesting thing to see play out.
Are there other questions for our luminary? No. Dave, brother, thank you.
Thank you, Andrew.
There's
Thanks, guys.
coffee and cookies in the back by the pool table. Thank you all for coming.
Hey, thank you.
But before, El Presidente has something for you.
Oh.
And can I borrow someone's camera?